video is sponsored by Squarespace. Go to squarespace.com/microphonenerds for 10% off your first purchase. So I bought this camera, the OM System TG7, largely for nostalgia. I had the original TG1 in 2012 and I took it on some blooming adventures and I really enjoyed it. If you don't know much about the TG series of cameras, they are tough cameras. So they're waterproof, shockproof, dustproof, Emily proof most of the time. If you want something that's a little bit more rugged, they're a great place to start. I bought this delightful little camera from Japan. I got a good deal for it. I bought it because I thought there's a space in my lineup for a photocentric waterproof camera. I have things like Insta360 cameras, which are waterproof for video, but for photo, sometimes you want something that's a little bit above and beyond. This will shoot RAW and it has a fantastic lens as well. It's 25mm to 100mm in full frame terms and it's all internal zoom as well, so it doesn't sort of protrude out as you use it. It's an f2 to f4.9 lens, so it's pretty bright, pretty decent, and there is an anti-fog, anti-everything coating as well, so very high quality. It's a 12 megapixel sensor and it's not Micro Four Thirds, the sensor is smaller, so don't be expecting miracles with this. You will have less dynamic range than an average Micro Four Thirds camera, but I still think it's worth using because the RAW files have lots of push and pull in them as far as they can for this sort of size sensor, and the JPEGs also look very nice straight out of camera. The OM System / Olympus colors are always lovely, and this is great for sort of an everyday carry. The photos are very nice. On the back, we have about 6 feet of glass. It is very tough. There is no touchscreen because it is designed to be used underwater. This, in everyday life when not underwater, can sort of slow things down a little bit. I like to use the touchscreen to dictate where I use my autofocus point, for example. Because it isn't a touchscreen, you do have to use the D-pad. It's not the end of the world, but it is just something to consider if you want something that's quite quick to use on a day-to-day basis. One of the first things I noticed when I started using this camera is how blooming light it is. It's 253 grams. I've got lenses that weigh this or more. This is crazy. Very light, and it's so that you wouldn't notice it in your bag if you want to stick it in just in case, which is what I do.
Okay, and where's your Olympus?
So I've taken it on a good few trips recently. I bought it in Japan and started using it in Japan. And then I went to the Faroe Islands with my dad and took it on a speedboat in the rain and the sea. And it rains approximately 125% of the time in the Faroe Islands. So it's a very good camera to have. And now I took it to Corfu and jumped in the sea and tried to take some marine life photos. Didn't do very well, but as a general sort of travel everyday carry camera, it's been really good. And that's the first use case. I think if you're looking for a compact, cheap, rugged everyday carry or travel camera, something that you might want to take photographs of your friends and family with, this is a good little option. The zoom lens makes it very versatile, and the quality of the JPEG straight out of camera means that you don't have to faff about with editing too much. I was ready to just pack up shop and be like, this is like the best incognito street photography camera ever with this lens, amazing, until I noticed that there was no shutter speed priority. We have aperture priority and we have ISO priority, which is P. There are no full manual controls and there is no shutter speed priority, which I think is a bit of an oversight, to be honest. I don't know about you, but that's probably the mode that I use the most when I'm out and about. Because like, I don't care what aperture I'm at as long as the thing I'm shooting is not blurred. I think that's more important personally. So, fuming, trying to do street photography. I mean, here in Corfu, it's not an issue. I can use any mode. I've actually been using auto today. I felt a bit dirty about it, but it is what it is. Because there's that much light, everything you shoot is obviously going to be completely in focus and not blurry anyway. But when you're shooting like miserable blooming Liverpool when it's raining, having control of your shutter speed is pretty much essential. So depending on where you're shooting will depend on how much this annoys you or not. I'm happy to say that there is a workaround though. There's two, in fact. You have scene modes on this camera and there is a sports mode, complete with a little noob diagram of a football player to show that it's for sports. You know, using those scene modes is not, it makes me feel horrible. So it's not for me, but it works. You know, if you need it, it works. The proper workaround, the easier way to sort of get some kind of creative control about your shutter speed in this camera is to set your minimum shutter speed. I searched high and low in the menus for this. I thought, That's what I need. I need to find it. Where will it be? Where will it be in these menus? Very logical menus, as always, obviously. I found the minimum shutter speed options in a menu called Auto ISO Set. Intuitive as ever. But anyway, I found it and it's there. So if you need to know where it is, that's where it is. And I found if I've set that at like 1/125th, something like that, 200th on a bright day, then I know I can use whatever mode I like and whatever I shoot will not be blurry. One thing I love, I mention it whenever a camera has this, is we have a lovely back thumb dial here. It just gives you a little bit more control over your settings. I've been using that as exposure compensation, which is really handy for street photography in particular, because sometimes it might expose for the sky and your subject's in shadow or vice versa. So having that at sort of quick access is very, very important. So let's talk use cases. I think it's a great everyday carry option, particularly if you're in regularly rainy weather or you go out to sea a lot. I think it's also great if you want to capture your family as well, because you could hand this to a kid and be like, go on, try and break it. I bet you can't break it. I mean, you know, you don't want to tempt fate, but it is very, very rugged. For street photography, in particular, this camera has an interesting trick up its sleeve. You can change it to full manual focus and use the thumb dial on the back to set the focus. This is particularly interesting and slightly bewildering considering there isn't actually manual settings, but you can use manual focus. Whatever. You've got focus peaking and manual controls. So if you shoot zone focusing when you're shooting street photography, so say you want to set your focus 2 meters away from you, you know, you could do that at the start of the day and then you've got something that you can shoot from the hip width. If you are a manual focus shooter, that's quite interesting. I think that's quite cool for a compact camera. Another thing that's really cool is we have a really great macro mode on this camera as well. And because it's an OM system camera, you do get the focus stacking feature. So you can shoot all the way through the focal plane, just like you can with the OM1, for example, and it will turn it into a JPEG for you. No further editing required. So the macro feature is very good, and then adding the focus stacking on top of that means you can get some really interesting close-up shots. Adorably, in the menu, it's called microscope mode, because I don't suppose the average user knows what macro means, and I thought that was really cute. There is also, in the marine mode, which is indicated by a fish, which I love. Look at the little fish. So sweet. In the fish mode, we have certain modes that are dedicated to underwater shooting. So you have underwater like snapshot mode, like selfies with people in. You have underwater wide and you have underwater macro. So you can use the macro mode underwater as well. I tried to get some fish when I was swimming. This is much how I shoot in normal circumstances, just hit and lift. But I just managed to get these boring grey fish that were like 12 feet beneath me. So it didn't quite go to plan. But proof of concept, it does work. I just needed better marine life. Another thing that's quite a pro feature that you wouldn't expect in a compact camera is it also has OM Systems Pro Capture mode built in, which means you can have pressure shutter, and then when you press the shutter, it records the bit before and the bit during while you're shooting. So that's a very pro feature in a compact camera. There's a lot of interesting things in this tiny camera. Let's see how this works as a selfie camera. One thing I wish that I'd had in that moment is a wider lens. And that's another thing that's quite interesting with this camera. On the front, as you can see, this comes off and you can add on cool little accessories. You can add on fisheye lenses, you can add on macro lights. So you can add on different accessories to this camera, which is quite cool. So what about video? Well, there is no mechanical IBIS, but you do have electronic IBIS, so there's a little bit of a punch in to stabilize the footage. But the good news is because the sensor is so small, it does a damn good job of stabilizing the footage for you. You do only have 4K 30p, so for random video snippets of your day-to-day life or your holiday, it does the job just fine. Thanks so much to Squarespace for sponsoring this little nerdy video. I love my Squarespace website, and I've been using Squarespace for many a year now, from my wedding photography and videography business right until now with my Microphone Nerds website, microphonenerds.com. Squarespace make editing your website super duper easy. If I can do it, anyone can do it. There's even a brand new feature called Blueprint AI, where you can custom make a template to your own specification. I think it's so important to have a corner of the internet to call your own these days. And that's why I love having my website. I know that no algorithm can dictate it. I know that everything that I want to say and share with the world is easily accessible to anyone who wants to listen. So whether you want to start a little side hustle or just share something that you're passionate about, Squarespace is a great place to start. Go check out what Squarespace can offer you at squarespace.com. And when you're ready to launch your website, go to squarespace.com/micro4nerds for 10% off your first purchase of a domain or website. Let's get back to the camera stuff. It could be me wanting the Earth, but I do think because it is such a modern camera, I was hoping for a bit more on the video side, like at least 24 or 25p in 4K, maybe 60p in 4K, though that's probably asking for too much. But video doesn't seem to be a focus for OM system, so it does seem to be in keeping with the rest of the range. Another time I found this camera very, very handy was in the Faroe Islands recently. I was on a speedboat and I went on a similar trip a year prior with my dad, and the speedboat was that bouncy. He actually managed to demolish his stock lens. He smashed it on a metal bar, and there ain't no way I was taking the OM system cameras and big white on a boat like that. Could you imagine? Imagine that conversation. Yeah, I just broke a 7,000 pound lens, sorry. No chance. So I took this instead. And because it has a 25 to 100 millimeter lens, it wasn't shabby. I could get the coastline, I could get some interesting stuff, and because it was shooting raw, I could tweak the photos afterwards and make them look pretty nice. So I've used it 3 times now. In Japan, I've done some nighttime photography and some everyday carry photography. In the Faroe Islands, I've done some speedboat of doom and a little bit of landscape photography. And then here in Corfu, I've done some street photography and some sort of catamaran fun. It's done great in all of these different situations, and I've really enjoyed using this camera. So if you already have a TG camera, is this worth the upgrade? Well, for me, coming from the TG1, of course it is. I've got 6 iterations to catch up, that's fine. If I had the TG6, I honestly don't think I would upgrade to the TG7. The upgrades seem to be very minimal, and that's a shame because the TG6 is 4 years old now. So what's new basically is the grip shape has changed a little bit. We have the OM system badge rather than Olympus, and it has a USB-C charging rather than micro USB. It will also do time-lapse now, which is an upgrade, but after 4 years of waiting for the upgrade, it's probably not what people were hoping for. What people were blooming hoping for is full manual control and shutter speed priority. Particularly if this is geared towards people that are shooting underwater photography, having manual control is basically essential. So I think it's a bit of an oversight. Hopefully with the TG8 we will get shutter speed priority and manual controls as well. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think it's worth the price? I'll put the updated prices on screen because I bought it from Japan, so I don't know what the going rate is. Hopefully if it's good, I'll be like, hey, and if it's really expensive, I'll be like, oh. So this is the price, hey. For me, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I wanted something that I could do photography with in water. It's filled the gap for me just fine. I'm not sure I would have bought it unless I got a really good deal in Japan, but I love it, it's great. Let me know what you think. Check out some more of my tiny cameras to see some other videos I've shot recently, my most recent one being the Lumix GM5, which is one of my all-time favorite tiny cameras.